There we
There
go.
you go.
Okay.
There we
Sorry.
go.
Thank you.
The verse 13, and I
Mhm.
heard a voice from heaven saying, write this. I think right from beginning, John was asked to be writing, right?
At the very beginning.
Yes, he was supposed to be writing. And I don't know, with this verse here, was John so much engrossed in what he was saying that he has forgotten to write, that he was being now asked to write? I don't know, but
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
But there was also a verse where he said, don't write. I can't remember where it was. So maybe he went right and then don't write. Okay, now you can write again.
That's good, Priscilla. That's what I was thinking. Hey, I told you not to write. And I think it had to do with when this was about to happen or whatever that was. I remember that. And so maybe he's reminding him, okay, now you can go ahead and start writing again if you haven't. So that was a really good observation, Priscilla.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he wasn't supposed to write down the words of the little scroll, which he ended up eating, or someone ended up eating.
And they
Yeah,
became
but-
bitter to his stomach. That's right.
Right.
That's
But we
exactly right.
he never gave us the words of the little scroll. I guess that's because he didn't write them down.
Very good. Very good. Were there any other thoughts or questions about this passage?
I thought in general, I had not about this particular passage, but I had a conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago who's like loves to talk theology and Bible stuff. And comes from a very conservative evangelical background. So I was talking about Revelation and sharing some of what we were learning in class. And he was shocked. Not necessarily in a bad way, maybe a little bit bad, but he said he had never heard anyone talk about Revelation as anything other than what's going to happen in the future, right? The end days yet to come. And I just think it's really sad that, there's so many other ways to make sense of this book. And I mean, he's my age and he's been a Christian his whole life and only ever heard it described one way.
And that is, you remember, Cheryl, because you commented on my first post that everything about Revelations has always been super scary.
Mm-hmm.
And so my thing is, I've sent a note to Dr. Holmes. I really struggled with my paper, and I really struggle thinking critically because I've got 56 years of what I've been taught, for 56 years, it's been this. And now, like, my head is exploding because I'm like, oh my God, what? I can think outside the box on this. I don't have to just take it literally for what it is. And I don't know. That's why I've been and I'm not saying this to, it's just been a struggle for me, but it's been a good struggle. It's not a struggle that I'm complaining about. It's been a really good struggle to have and, be able to think critically. Because I'm telling you, before seminary, I was like, no, the Bible says this. No, the Bible says this. Oh, now I'm like, that's not what it meant. So, yeah.
I feel your pain.
Yes, that is something that every intro to Hebrew Bible class that I have ever taught or helped with students, they first thing we start in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3, and you start, talking about those stories and that there's 2 creation stories and people lose their minds. And immediately out the gate, they're just like, well, is any of it true then? So yes, I'm glad that you find it a liberating exercise. I think most people do once they get past the initial shock, but it can be very disconcerting at first, but liberating if you allow it to be. So, and Revelation is particularly difficult just because it's so symbolic and the language is disturbing in a lot of places. You know, and even in this passage, we have the idea of torture or torment. The smoke of their torment goes up. And so, how did you all translate or work with that particular verse? It's verse 11.
So in my translations, I just like translate it as woodenly as I can get away with. I said, the smoke of their torture goes up forever and ever.
Yep. Very good.
I like try to be as just literal of the text as I can be, because I feel like I'm not gonna sway into, move into waters where I'm interpreting it incorrectly or translating it incorrectly. And interpreting it as something else entirely.
Yes, it is in many cases, even though our translations are an interpretation, but were there other thoughts or translations? Did anyone do anything differently? Did you look up where the word gets used or the verb even gets used in the rest of the New Testament? That's always a fun exercise, I think. The no, the basanismu, torture, torment. So it's
I did not, but that would be an interesting thing to do.
To me, it's a lot of fun. So this particular noun only occurs in the book of Revelation, but the verbal form, basanizo, actually occurs several times in the Gospels and once in Second Peter. And sometimes the verb gets used to talk about the being battered by waves in the sea, but it's used in the verses, the different renditions of the Gerasene demoniac, and where he asks that he not be tormented by Jesus. Why have you come to torment me? And I thought that was a pretty interesting just parallel to these verses, because those who follow Rome or Babylon will be tormented like Jesus tormented the demons, the legion in the one man.
So as I look at this in the BDAG, I see it's mentioned in the Wisdom of Solomon and in 4 Maccabees, 4th Maccabees.
Okay.
And I was thinking this the other day as y'all were talking about like Second Esdras and then Baruch, maybe. I don't remember the specifics, but can we really understand kind of Revelation? Should we really have like sort of read these things before this class? Because I'm feeling like the more we go forward and the more we're looking at these, inner testaments, that I kind of feel like I should be a little more familiar with some of these. And I don't know if these are apocryphal or if they're even sort of outside the canon, even the apocryphal canon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to think that part of my personal journey has been, oh, well, if I need to understand this thing, I have to go further back in history because there's always something earlier, from the dawning of literature to all of these different classics that we receive. You have to know all of them in order to understand all of the different layers that are occurring. And so for Revelation, yeah, it would be super helpful to read first and second Esdras or third and fourth Ezra, and Enoch and Baruch, and make sure, you know, Ezekiel and Daniel from the Hebrew Bible. All of those things get picked up here in Revelation, in addition to a lot of Greco-Roman mythologies and different stories and other religions' stories. And so, yeah, it would be nice to just know all of the things so that we could know all of the ways that this is picking up on different aspects of other cultures in order to appeal to the widest audience possible. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily possible, but it's always helpful to definitely read the things that have gone before that we know it's referencing. And so if you have spare time, I'm sure among all of your other classes and everything else that you all have going on, you can read those those other apocryphal books and Hebrew Bible books for fun. And then read Dante, because Dante is a reception of Revelation, and that has colored a lot of our understandings of Satan and hell and heaven even. So
Yeah, that's why you do doctoral theses, right? On this kind of stuff.
yeah, if you really hate yourself, that's why you do them. If you're a masochist, that's why you do these. But yes, it's always good to have all of that background under your belt to be able to know, you know, a lot of Revelation also is a callback to the imprecatory Psalms. So the Psalms that are wishing for the judgment of Yahweh on the peoples who have been harming the nation of Israel. And it's this therapeutic literature to say, you know, yes, I'm hoping for deliverance, but part of that deliverance will mean the punishment of my oppressors. And Revelation has that in spades, looking forward to the destruction of the oppressor, Rome, Babylon. And it helps to get all of that out of individual and collective psyches, right? I don't know if any of you have ever, you know, screamed into a pillow, or if you've seen those rage rooms that they have now, where you can go and just destroy things for fun.
Yeah.
You can pay to like smash TVs and just throw plates against walls and destroy things in order to get out your rage and anger and frustration. Yeah, they have those. I see lots of surprised faces, but those are a thing.
Has anyone ever been to one?
I've never been. I have friends who have been and say it's very therapeutic to just go and let out some rage and frustration. So but that's what we have in Revelation, is this attempt at getting out the frustration from the suffering that you've been experiencing.
My rage room is my car.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my car. And it's funny because even when my kids were little, I'd be like, okay, you got something bothering you? And we just scream in the car. Ah! Then we'd stop and it would be over.
Well,
Now,
but I thought you were saying you were taking it out on other drivers.
And
Hey,
going
Priscilla,
back to
I'm sorry, Priscilla, I was gonna say, let me know when you're in the car. I'll move and just stay home that day.
so going back to Revelation,
this
and I
is
remember reading this at the very beginning of the class, the persecution is really just started, right?
yes.
It'll get like there's already suffering and persecution that's causing the author to write this, but it's going to get a lot worse over the next like 200 years.
Yep, it does. And I don't know that the author saw that coming necessarily, or maybe he did and was still just exhorting his audience to keep up the faith. But yeah, it wasn't super bad. It wasn't too different than it had been for millennia for the Israelite people, for the Jews. They were always this tiny little group of people that kept getting dominated by the major power players in the ancient world. And they were always under someone's thumb, almost always having to deal with a larger empire that was overseeing all of their activities. But yes, it does get much worse until Christianity becomes the religion of the empire, and then there starts a whole other host of problems.
Right. I
great.
read for, I don't know if it was the midterm paper, but I went back and found some like references to history of Christian persecution, which was really interesting. And I think that both Blount and Schussler Fiorenza touched on it a little bit at the beginning of the book, but I think it would have been good to have had a little more of that to sort of understand the context into which this is being written.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there other thoughts or questions about the text of this chapter?
I had a question about mid-heaven.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I haven't
What-
heard of mid-heaven.
Verse-
Like if he's in
Verse
he's
6.
in heaven in the sky, is this where? Because I when I was doing my paper, I found something that was talking about how Uranus you could translate as sky, because like John's already in heaven, and so he's sort of looking up and he's looking at and sort of seeing it in the sky.
Mhm.
And it's more of like a spatial thing than relative to John's position versus in heaven versus not in heaven as we think about heaven. So I was just curious then as we get to this and it talks about mid-heaven,
Mhm.
is there a mid-heaven, or is that just sort of it's sort of not all the way up, it's sort of in the middle of the sky somewhere? And what does that mean?
Yeah, so I have always understood it to be, yes, it's spatial in that like it's halfway there, halfway to where God is. It could also be mid-heaven at the highest point where the sun, so at like noon when the sun reaches the zenith of the sky is where he's talking about as well. So mid-heaven being like this way instead of top down. So east-west versus top down.
It's kind of like bi-weekly then. There's two completely different definitions of the same word.
Yes, to my understanding, yes, I think that there's two
Okay.
different ways to take it and to interpret it.
Then my other question was on first fruits, and it was our case. And I know this is in verse 4.
Yeah, I think there was a note in that in Blunt.
RK, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I was trying to find the note. So that's the one where it said it could be the beginning versus first fruits. Is that in
Yeah,
Blount? I was trying to go back and find that note, and I didn't see it in Matheson or Schuster or something.
I think it was Blunt who talked about that.
Oh yeah,
Let's
yeah, it's on page 270. Or no, sorry. It goes into the
First fruits belong to, yeah, so different kinds of offerings. First fruits belong to the first category or the initial offerings. Yeah, I thought he talked about a separate interpretation of this, or let's see. On page 264, the phrase "ab arcase,"
Okay.
tested by different witnesses. They have different meanings. they were redeemed from humanity from the beginning, or they were redeemed from humanity as a first fruit. So yeah, I'm not sure which I think is more, which I would take to be more accurate. They both make sense to me. Those who were were the first redeemed versus those who were planning to be redeemed from the beginning, which
Mhm.
yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had a better answer than Blunt, but I don't.
So can we look at that, like in that A part right there? This is talking about the word Haas,
Mhm.
but it's saying the external evidence balance in support of the inclusion, then it lists all these things, and the exclusion, then it lists other things. Was there, it seemed like there was a video at one point, maybe this was last semester, where Dr. Holmes sort of talked about how to read these things, because that's one thing I always get confused at, is trying to read and understanding the manuscripts versus the papyrus versus the fragments. And then, if there's, what to give more weight to, or it seems that the tradition seems to be, well, the majority rules a lot of times.
Most of the time it's majority rules. Sometimes you go with the more difficult reading because if you go with the more difficult reading, it's more likely to be the case because future translators or interpreters or copyists will try to smooth over a text, smooth over a difficult one. And so sometimes that takes precedence. It just depends on what the different variants are.
Okay, well, that makes sense on that last thing, that we were talking about aparche. It says appearing only here in Revelation is also the slightly more difficult reading. So maybe that's why then that took priority on the
Yes.
aparche. Okay.
Yeah. As a general rule, if people tend to prefer the more difficult reading when there is one.
Do you remember, Sherry, or anybody else who was in our Greek class on sort of a lesson on how to read the?
Yeah, it was at the very end. I don't have the Blount textbook with me.
Okay.
But he talked about there were 4 codexes, I think, right, which were mostly intact copies, and then
Mhm.
and that were really old. And then older than that, were just little fragments. The papyrus, I think, were just a little fragments. He talked about it like the very last week
Okay. I'll
in
try
our
to get
Greek
back.
class if you wanted to
Okay.
go find the lecture.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Oh yes, all of the different manuscripts are
Very, very,
very interesting. It is. Hebrew has the same problem. The Hebrew Bible has the same problem.
This is a bit of an aside, but I'm leading a Bible study tonight on Esther chapter 5. And when I was reading it, I saw a note in our NRSV about the Greek editions.
Mhm.
And so I went and did a little bit of research on it because I don't have time to do a lot of research on anything. And I found that when they wrote the Septuagint, so when they took the Hebrew text and wrote the first copies of it in Greek, they added a bunch of sections to the book of Esther, which is like really interesting. And then they didn't know what to do with them. And eventually they kind of took them out again. So, but I'm going to read one of them actually in my group tonight. I think it's just kind of interesting.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. Yeah. Yep. They did add stuff to Esther. which is-
Yeah, quite a bit actually.
I think the additions, I would have to, do some calculations, but I think the additions are about as long or longer than the book itself.
Mhm.
So
trying to tie it more to God, I think, for the most part.
Yes.
Like there's prayers in there and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Trying to make it center on God because God's not mentioned in the book of Esther,
Right.
of course. So gotta bring in God somewhere. Can't leave God out. So were there other things you all wanted to bring out from this passage today? I think we covered all of the things that I was interested in talking about. Have we gone over why Babylon is code? Why Babylon gets used instead of John using Rome? Have you all talked about that or read about that yet? No. Any ideas or thoughts about why?
Well, I would say this is probably wrong, but because Babylon was more in their past and they know the full story of it, right? Versus Rome is sort of in their present and still trying to, they don't know the extent to which Rome will become a beast.
Yeah, Sherry, I was just going to say, from what I understand about Babylon, they were very vicious in terms of how they treated other nations. They were kind of known for their viciousness in terms of whoever they conquered. That was just a thought when you asked that question.
It's also Babylon destroyed the first temple,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
and then Rome destroyed the second.
Yes.
True.
Absolutely.
But we don't know for certain that Revelation was written after the destruction of the second temple, right?
I tend to date it after, but that's my limited New Testament training, what limited training I have in New Testament. But I think there are other scholars who say that yes, it was written before the destruction of the second temple.
And it doesn't really specifically call out the destruction of the second temple, right?
Right.
Although it's hard to tell what it's calling out a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, and
Oh,
the
you
need for
tell-
a new Jerusalem and a new, yeah. Go ahead.
So you tell us why Babylon?
Brian, were you going to say something and then I'll.
I was just going to say I think when he's told to measure the temple and then there's no measurements given at all, I sort of felt like that was sort of an acknowledgement of the temple not existing anymore. Because if you compare that with what, that first bit, I think it was it Ezekiel, where it's like 5 chapters of cubits.
Yep. So I do think it presupposes this idea that there's either already not a temple or there's not going to be a temple. And so, yeah, we need a new city and a new everything. But yeah, so Babylon, in a lot of literature, we have to use coded language because, of course, trying to stay under the radar of the empire as it stands. So using coded language is always going to be preferable so we don't get called out or caught for our resistance. I think is part of why he uses Babylon. And of course, yes, Babylon destroyed the first temple, and Babylon was particularly awful in the Jewish mind because of the Babylonian exile and how that resonated in the psyche of the Jewish people. And then, of course, when you're in the midst of persecution, you develop stories of things and you remember stories of things that happened prior and how God delivered you from those things. Because, of course, the Judeans were rescued by Persia. Cyrus the Great was their Messiah at the time and rescued them from Babylon. And so here we have a similar hope that God will in fact deliver, and as he did from the power of Babylon. And yeah, just like in Babylon, they would remember Egypt for instance. And there's lots of references back to Egypt in Jeremiah and Hosea. So similar things going on. But yeah, were there any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Well, this is just a comment. My takeaway from this week is how the devil always tries to counterfeit what is real. You know, in the podcast, Dr. Chris talked about the counterfeit trinity, the dragon, the sea, and the beast. It was amazing when I was listening to it, because in theology, we're just dealing with Trinity, and the same thing running through Revelation. It was so amazing. I said, wow. So it means that the devil is out there always trying to deceive, us to believe in the way that has given power to the beast also to destroy and make all kinds of things, to deceive people to believe that that is the real thing. Yeah, so that is my takeaway for this.
Bishop Crenshaw, Eddie, always says that the devil's never had a good enough day to take the day off. So it's constant.
And I'd say too, the best liars are the ones who make things sound the most truthful, who lie just enough without going overboard. So yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? I don't want to hold you all if you don't have things to say or share or ask, but it's good to see your faces, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and good luck with all of your papers and projects and preparing for the end of the semester.
Just a reminder, everybody, we have our translation journal due this week.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Y'all have a great rest of the day. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
leading, Serena.
Thank you for the discussion. I appreciate it. Have a good week.